When George Washington was born in 1732, an independent America did not yet exist. The continent was divided into British colonies living under laws set in London. Tensions were growing. Britain and France were battling for control of North America, while indigenous nations fought for their lands and influence. The Washington family traced its roots to County Durham in England. Washington's great-grandfather, John Washington, arrived in colonial Virginia in 1657, and George was born there generations later. He grew up in a large, moderately wealthy family. His father, Augustine Washington, was a landowner who cultivated tobacco, and his mother, Mary Ball Washington, was strict and deeply religious, traits that helped shape George's character. When George was 11, his father died of illness. The estate was divided among the sons, and George inherited a medium-sized farm and 10 enslaved people. But even as a teenager, his ambitions went far beyond simply being a planter. At age 20, Washington joined the Virginia militia, quickly stood out for his discipline, neatness, and ambition. That same year, a new Masonic lodge opened in Fredericksburg, and on November 4th, Washington joined it. In 1753, the governor sent him on a dangerous mission to deliver Britain's demand that the French abandon the Ohio Valley. Washington completed the journey and became the first to report that France intended to hold the region. A year later, he led a detachment that clashed with French forces near Fort Necessity. The battle ended in defeat, and Washington signed a capitulation, later claiming he did not understand the French text. Ironically, this failure made him famous. Colonial newspapers wrote about the young officer who had fired some of the first shots of the conflict. During the French and Indian War, Washington took part in several campaigns. In 1755, when General Braddock's army was ambushed, Washington organized the retreat and saved the survivors, solidifying his reputation as a reliable commander. Yet the British Army refused to accept him into its ranks, a painful lesson that marked all colonial officers as second class in the eyes of London. After the war, Washington resigned his commission and returned to Mount Vernon, his estate on the Potomac. He focused on agriculture and introduced new farming techniques. Mount Vernon was a large plantation, and part of its labor force consisted of enslaved people. Over time, Washington's views on slavery began to shift. Though still a strict owner, he condemned cruelty and forbade the separation of families during sales, an uncommon practice among planters. Gradually, he came to see slavery as morally troubling and economically inefficient. At the end of his life, he became the first founding father to order the emancipation of his enslaved workers in his will, an extraordinary act for someone of his status. In 1759, Washington married Martha Custis, a wealthy and influential widow. Her dowry brought him 85 enslaved people and 8,000 acres of land, making Washington one of the richest men in the colony. He entered politics and, as a member of the Virginia House of Burgesses, openly opposed new taxes, especially the Stamp Act, which taxed newspapers, books, trade documents, and legal papers. By 1768 to 1769, Washington's stance toward British policy had become sharply negative. He wrote that something must be done to save the freedoms inherited from the ancestors, even if force became necessary. Soon, Virginia's legislators declared that only they had the right to tax the local population. The conflict temporarily eased, but in 1775, the gunpowder incident erupted. The royal governor attempted to seize the colony's gunpowder stores, sparking protests and an attempted march on the governor's palace. Similar clashes spread across the colonies. As tensions escalated, the colonists realized they needed a unified force to stand against Britain's professional army. Thus, in 1775, the Continental Army was formed, and George Washington was unanimously appointed its commander-in-chief. The long struggle for independence had begun. His army was poorly trained and lacked weapons, uniforms, and even food. Soldiers sometimes went days without eating. They wore makeshift markings to recognize one another in battle. But Washington kept the army disciplined, retreating when necessary to preserve it. Its very survival became a symbol of the fight for liberty. Major battles soon engulfed the eastern seaboard, including Bunker Hill, Saratoga, and Monmouth. The American victory at Saratoga became the turning point. It convinced France to join the war and provide ships, money, and military aid. As the war shifted south, key battles took place at Cowpens and Guilford Courthouse. The decisive moment came in 1781 at Yorktown, where American and French forces surrounded General Cornwallis's army, forcing its surrender. Britain halted military operations and recognized U.S. independence in the 1783 Treaty of Paris. After the war, Washington voluntarily resigned his command, a gesture that stunned Europe and elevated his moral authority. "I shall now quietly glide down the stream of life until I sleep with my fathers," he wrote, his hair gray and eyesight dim from years of war. After independence, the young nation plunged into political and financial chaos. Henry Knox wrote to Washington that the country stood on the brink of anarchy. In March 1787, Washington agreed to head Virginia's delegation to the Constitutional Convention. He soon presided over the entire convention in Philadelphia, guiding the creation of the U.S. Constitution. He noted that the new system contained more safeguards against tyranny than any government hitherto devised by the wit of man. Washington was elected president unanimously, the only such election in U.S. history. Realizing how fragile the country was, he focused on strengthening unity and trust in the new government. He formed the first presidential cabinet, which included Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson, two influential men with opposing philosophies. Under Washington, the Bank of the United States was created, national taxes were introduced, and the foundations of the American financial system were established. His presidency also faced major internal challenges, such as the Whiskey Rebellion in 1794. Washington personally led federal troops to restore order, the first and only time a sitting U.S. president commanded forces in the field. It demonstrated that the new government had both legitimacy and strength. In foreign affairs, Washington pursued neutrality. In 1793, he issued the Proclamation of Neutrality to keep the U.S. out of European wars, particularly between Britain and revolutionary France. Important treaties followed, including Jay's Treaty with Britain and the Treaty of San Lorenzo with Spain, which ensured free navigation on the Mississippi River. At the end of his second term, Washington refused a third, creating a crucial democratic precedent for the peaceful transfer of power. In his farewell address, he warned against political parties and foreign interference. Washington is called a founding father because his decisions shaped the American political system, the presidency, the military, the economy, and the political culture. He died in 1799 from a severe throat infection. Washington entered history as a man who laid the foundation of the American political order, ensured the peaceful transfer of power, and proved that leadership is not about holding power but about serving the nation. From a farmer and colonial officer to the central figure in the birth of a nation, he became the symbol of the country he helped create.